It happened far away from movie sets and flashing cameras, in a quiet, controlled space where egos don't usually collide. Steven Seagal was visiting a private training facility, the kind of place where discipline mattered more than reputation. No red carpet. No spotlight. Just a handful of people in the room, only 8 witnesses, to be exact. Seagal didn't look like a Hollywood star that day. He wore simple training clothes, moved slowly, deliberately. To some, he looked calm. To others, maybe too calm. Among the group was a Navy SEAL, not fresh, not loud, not inexperienced. This was someone who had spent years in real combat zones, someone who didn't care about box office numbers or action movie legends. He had watched Seagal quietly for a while, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. And then he said it. Not shouted. Not aggressive. Just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Come fight a real man." The room went silent. No gasps. No laughter. Just that uncomfortable stillness when everyone knows a line has been crossed. A few people glanced at Seagal, waiting for an explosion, anger, insults, maybe a dramatic response. After all, this was Steven Seagal, a man famous for on-screen dominance and bone-snapping confidence. But nothing happened. Seagal didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He didn't even change his expression. And that confused people more than anger ever would. This is how real-life tension often begins, not with fists, but with ego. When someone feels their identity threatened, especially in front of others, they instinctively try to reclaim power. Sometimes through words. Sometimes through challenges. And sometimes through mockery. The SEAL wasn't just questioning Seagal's skills, he was questioning his authenticity. Was Steven Seagal a real martial artist? Or just another actor playing tough guys? The witnesses felt it. This wasn't friendly banter anymore. This was reputation versus experience. Hollywood versus the battlefield. A man built by scripts versus a man shaped by survival. And still, Seagal stood there quietly. That silence did something strange to the room. It made people uneasy. Because confident people usually defend themselves quickly. But what if this wasn't hesitation? What if it was restraint? Before we go any further, what do you think? Do you believe movie fighters can ever match real soldiers? Comment yes or no, and tell me why. Because what happened next? Only 8 people witnessed it, and every single one of them remembered it for the rest of their lives. The silence after the comment felt heavier than the words themselves. No one laughed. No one moved. Even the air in the room seemed to tighten, as if everyone instinctively understood this wasn't a joke anymore. The Navy SEAL leaned back slightly, arms still crossed, his expression calm but challenging, the kind of calm that comes from someone who has tested himself in places most people only see in documentaries. Steven Seagal remained exactly where he was. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He didn't react the way people expected him to. A few of the witnesses exchanged glances. One of them later described it as the most awkward 30 seconds I've ever experienced. Another shifted their weight nervously, unsure whether this was about to turn into a verbal argument or something far more physical. The SEAL broke the silence first. "So," he said casually, "is that all movie stuff? Or do you actually know how to use it?" Still no response. Seagal slowly adjusted his stance, not aggressively, more like someone settling into comfort. His eyes stayed focused, but not hostile. If anything, he looked peeved. This is where human psychology plays a major role. When someone throws a public challenge, they're often expecting immediate validation, anger, denial, or defense. Silence disrupts that expectation. It forces the challenger to sit with their own words, and sometimes, their own insecurity. The SEAL, perhaps without realizing it, had put himself in a spotlight now. A faint smirk crossed his face. "I mean no offense," he added, though the tone suggested the opposite. "I've seen real combat. Real violence. That stuff doesn't look like what you do on screen." One of the witnesses cleared their throat, clearly uncomfortable. Another subtly pulled out their phone, not to record, but out of habit, as if their body sensed something historic might be unfolding. Seagal finally spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. "I understand where you're coming from," he said. "That was it. No defense of his career. No mention of decades of training. No name-dropping. Just a simple acknowledgement. The SEAL raised an eyebrow, almost disappointed. "That's it?" he asked. "No explanation?" Seagal tilted his head slightly. "Explanations don't change outcomes." That answer landed differently. Some of the witnesses later admitted they didn't know how to interpret it. Was it confidence? Was it avoidance? Or was it something else entirely? In real confrontations, power often shifts not through dominance, but through control of emotion. People who have something to prove usually talk more. People who don't conserve energy. The SEAL stepped a little closer now, not threateningly, but deliberately, invading personal space just enough to test boundaries. "So you're saying you don't need to prove anything?" he asked. Seagal met his eyes. "I'm saying proving something is optional." The room felt smaller. This wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about identity, about respect, about whether reputation is earned through stories or through silence. Put yourself in that room for a moment. If someone challenged you like this, in front of others, would you explain yourself, or stay silent and let your presence speak? Comment, explain, or stay silent, and tell me why. The SEAL exhaled slowly, almost like a laugh, but not quite. "All right," he said. "Then let's see what's real." And with that sentence, the tension crossed a point of no return. Because now, everyone understood something important. This was no longer about words. And whatever happened next would redefine how every single person in that room saw both men, forever. The moment the Navy SEAL said, "Then let's see what's real," the atmosphere shifted completely. Up until now, the tension had lived in words and silence, uncomfortable, heavy, but still contained. That single sentence cracked the surface. Everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't posturing anymore. This was intent. The SEAL took a step back, giving space, not out of fear but out of habit, the kind drilled into people who understand distance, timing, and consequence. His posture stayed relaxed, but there was something sharper in his eyes now. Steven Seagal didn't move right away. He inhaled slowly, then exhaled, as if grounding himself. When he spoke, his voice was steady and almost instructional. "A challenge," he said, "doesn't always mean what people think it means." The SEAL tilted his head. "Sounds like an excuse." A couple of witnesses shifted uncomfortably. One of them later admitted they expected Seagal to finally snap, to defend his legacy, his training, his reputation. After all, this was a man whose entire public image was built on being untouchable. Instead, Seagal said something unexpected. "You've been in real combat," he said calmly. "That means you already know, the goal isn't to prove who's tougher. It's to go home alive." This is where clashes between ego-driven strength and experience-driven restraint become clear. People who've survived real danger often understand something others don't. Unnecessary conflict is a liability. Yet paradoxically, refusing to engage can sometimes feel like disrespect to someone who thrives on confrontation. The SEAL scoffed quietly. "We're not in a war zone," he replied. "This is controlled. No excuses." "Control," Seagal said, "is exactly the point." That word hung in the air. The SEAL stepped forward again, this time more assertively. "You're telling me all those movies, all those techniques, they work on someone trained to hurt people for real?" Seagal met his gaze. "I'm telling you that training is training," he said. "Intent is what changes outcomes." For the first time, the SEAL's smile faded. One of the witnesses swallowed hard. Another crossed their arms tightly, bracing. It was clear now, this wasn't about embarrassing a celebrity anymore. This was about testing a claim, one that had lived in the public imagination for decades. Hollywood versus reality. Performance versus survival. "All right," the SEAL said after a pause. "No audience. No drama. You and me. Quick." The room seemed to hold its breath. Seagal didn't answer immediately. He looked around, not nervously, but deliberately, at the people present. Then he said something that caught everyone off guard. "I don't fight to impress," he said. "If we do anything, it's to demonstrate." The SEAL raised an eyebrow. "Demonstrate what?" "Control," Seagal replied. And restraint. At this stage, many conflicts turn irreversible because neither side wants to lose face. Walking away feels like weakness. Continuing feels dangerous. The people who navigate this moment best are often those who redefine the terms of the conflict instead of accepting them as given. The SEAL hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. That hesitation mattered. Because it suggested something important. He wasn't dealing with someone afraid. He was dealing with someone choosing. Fine, the SEAL said. Show me. The witnesses instinctively stepped back, forming a loose circle. No one spoke. No one laughed. Whatever was about to happen, everyone understood it would be fast, and irreversible in terms of perception. Seagal adjusted his stance slightly, feet grounded, shoulders relaxed. No dramatic pose. No cinematic flair. Just alignment. Before we do anything, he said evenly, understand this, if you rush to win, you lose awareness. The SEAL clenched his jaw. You talk a lot for someone who doesn't want to prove anything. Seagal nodded once. That's fair. Another pause. The kind of pause where people later say, I knew something was coming. Let me ask you honestly, at this point in the story, who do you think is in control? The trained soldier with real combat experience? Or the calm man refusing to play the ego game? Comment SEAL or Seagal, and explain your reasoning. Because right here, in this exact moment, the situation stopped being about strength. It became about decision. And the next move, whether it came from action or restraint, would change how everyone in that room understood power forever. The loose circle around them widened slightly, not because anyone was told to move, but because instinct took over. Every witness felt it, that quiet internal alarm that signals something important is about to happen. Not loud. Not explosive. Just inevitable. Steven Seagal stood relaxed, hands open at his sides. The Navy SEAL, on the other hand, shifted his weight subtly, testing balance, reading distance. His body language was disciplined, efficient, the posture of someone trained to assess threats quickly and decisively. But something was different now. The SEAL wasn't smiling anymore. You sure about this? He asked. Not mockingly this time. Almost professionally. Seagal nodded once. As long as we keep it respectful. That word again. Respect. This is the moment where many confrontations either explode or dissolve. When adrenaline meets uncertainty, people are forced to reassess. Respect doesn't always soften tension. Sometimes it sharpens it, because it removes excuses. There's no villain, no insult to hide behind. Just two individuals standing in a choice they both helped create. The SEAL took another step forward, then stopped. You know, he said, most guys talk themselves into a corner by now. You didn't. Seagal replied calmly, talking builds walls. Awareness removes them. One of the witnesses later said that sentence alone changed how they saw the entire situation. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It was a reframing. The SEAL exhaled slowly through his nose. All right, he said. No tricks. No theatrics. Agreed, Seagal answered. They faced each other now, close enough to feel presence, far enough to react. No dramatic music. No countdown. Just silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Then Seagal spoke again. Before we move, he said, understand something important. This isn't about dominance. The SEAL looked at him sharply. Then what is it about? Responsibility, Seagal replied. If someone gets hurt, that's on both of us. That landed. For a brief second, the SEAL looked past him, not at the crowd, but inward. Anyone who had been in real danger before recognized that look. The moment where confidence checks itself. This is a rarely discussed truth. People trained in violence often carry a deeper awareness of consequence. The idea of winning loses its shine when you understand what injuries actually cost. Physically, mentally, legally. This awareness doesn't make someone weak. It makes them careful. You're saying you don't want to win, the SEAL said. I'm saying winning isn't the goal, Seagal replied. Control is. The SEAL nodded slowly. All right. Show me control. That was the turning point. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. The challenge was still there, but now it was no longer fueled by ego. It was curiosity, testing, a professional interest in truth. The witnesses felt it too. The room no longer felt hostile. It felt focused. Seagal shifted his stance slightly, a small adjustment, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. His posture remained loose, almost casual, but grounded. No tension in his shoulders. No visible preparation for attack. The SEAL noticed. "Interesting," he murmured. "What?" Seagal asked. "You're not loading up," the SEAL said. "Most people do." Seagal's response was simple. "Loading up reveals intent." Another pause. Longer this time. In many disciplines, martial arts, negotiations, even arguments, the person who reveals intent first often loses advantage. Calm isn't just emotional control, it's informational control. When you give nothing away, the other person has to guess. The SEAL adjusted his footing again, then stopped himself. He was thinking now, not reacting. "You know," he said quietly, "I expected arrogance." Seagal gave a small nod. "Most people do." "And instead?" the SEAL asked. "Stillness," Seagal replied. The word felt heavier than it should have. One of the witnesses later admitted their heart was pounding harder now than it had earlier. Not because they expected violence, but because they sensed resolution. Something was about to crystallize. "Let me ask you something, honestly. At this stage, do you think restraint is a sign of confidence? Or a sign of uncertainty? Comment confidence or uncertainty, and explain your thinking." The SEAL took one final breath. "All right," he said. "I'm ready." Seagal nodded. "So am I." No one spoke. No one moved. And in that quiet, balanced moment, with no audience applause, no cameras, no second chances, the situation reached its true turning point. Because whatever happened next wouldn't just answer who was more skilled. It would answer something deeper. What does real strength actually look like when no one is watching? No one counted down. No one gave a signal. The moment arrived the way real moments usually do, quietly, without ceremony. The Navy SEAL shifted first. Not an attack. Not a strike. Just a subtle forward movement, testing reaction, testing awareness. It was controlled, professional, the kind of motion designed to read another person before committing fully. Steven Seagal noticed immediately. But he didn't react the way most people would. He didn't step back. He didn't tense up. He didn't mirror the movement. Instead, he adjusted, barely. A slight turn of the shoulders. A change in angle so small that one of the witnesses later said, "I almost missed it, but somehow it changed everything." This is something people who've never trained seriously often misunderstand. Real control doesn't come from speed alone, it comes from positioning. The right angle at the right time can neutralize force before it ever becomes dangerous. The SEAL advanced again, this time more decisively. Still measured. Still disciplined. But now there was intent behind it. And that's when it happened. Not a fight. Not a clash. Not a flurry of movement. Just one moment. Seagal stepped into the motion instead of away from it. His hand moved, not fast in a flashy way, but precise. A redirect rather than a strike. The SEAL's forward momentum suddenly had nowhere to go. Balance shifted. Not violently. Not dramatically. But unmistakably. In less than a second, the SEAL found himself halted, posture compromised, center controlled. Not pinned. Not hurt. Just stopped. The room froze. One of the witnesses later said, "It felt like time skipped." The SEAL's expression changed first. Not pain, not fear, but surprise. Genuine surprise. He tried to adjust. Seagal didn't escalate. He held the position calmly, effortlessly, as if to say, "This is enough." This is the difference between winning and ending a situation. Many confrontations escalate because neither side knows when to stop. Control is knowing exactly when no further action is necessary. "All right," the SEAL said quietly. Not loudly. Not defensively. Just honestly. Seagal released immediately and stepped back. No follow-up. No display. No victory stance. The SEAL straightened himself, took a breath, and nodded once. He rolled his shoulders slightly, processing what had just happened, not physically, but mentally. That was, he paused, choosing his words carefully, not what I expected. Seagal said nothing. That silence spoke louder than anything else. The witnesses stood frozen, unsure if it was over or if something else was coming. But the tension had changed. It was no longer sharp. It was settled. Moments like this often trigger a psychological shift called reframing. When expectations collapse, people are forced to reassess their assumptions. The SEAL wasn't embarrassed, he was recalibrating. After a few seconds, the SEAL broke the silence again. You didn't try to hurt me, he said. Seagal nodded. There was no need. The SEAL let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. Most people would have taken advantage of that opening. Seagal replied evenly, that's why most people escalate problems. Another pause. Longer this time. Let me ask you, seriously, do you think real skill is shown by how much damage someone can do? Or by how little damage they choose to do? Comment damage or control, and explain your answer. The SEAL looked around briefly, noticing the witnesses for the first time since it began. 8 people. 8 silent observers. No cheering. No clapping. Just awareness. He turned back to Seagal. You know, he said, I came in thinking this was about proving something. Seagal met his eyes. Most people do. And now? The SEAL asked. Now, Seagal said, you decide what the moment means. That landed hard. The SEAL nodded again, slower this time. Fair enough. There was no apology. None was needed. There was no celebration either. That would have cheapened it. Instead, there was something rarer. Mutual recognition. Respect earned in silence often lasts longer than respect demanded loudly. When ego steps aside, learning becomes possible, on both sides. The circle loosened. People exhaled without realizing they'd been holding their breath. Someone shifted their feet. Another finally blinked. It was over. No one had been hurt. No one had been humiliated. But something had been clarified. And everyone in that room understood one thing with absolute certainty. They had just witnessed a moment that would never be recreated. Not on film, not on camera, not for applause. Only 8 people saw it. And every one of them knew they had just learned something important about the difference between appearance and ability, between noise and mastery. Because the most powerful move that day was knowing when to stop. The moment ended, but the impact didn't. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The kind of silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore, it was reflective. Heavy in a different way. Like the room itself needed time to process what had just happened. The Navy SEAL was the first to move. He took a step back, then another, creating space not out of defeat, but out of respect. His posture had changed. Earlier, there had been a subtle edge, readiness, challenge, evaluation. Now there was something calmer. More grounded. He nodded once. Not exaggerated. Not performative. Just honest. I get it now, he said quietly. Steven Seagal didn't respond right away. He stood where he was, breathing evenly, shoulders relaxed, as if nothing unusual had occurred. To an outsider, it might have looked anticlimactic. But to the 8 people in that room, it felt like a shift had just taken place. When expectations collapse, people often feel disoriented. This isn't embarrassment, it's recalibration. The SEAL wasn't processing physical loss. He was processing a mental update. The idea that skill doesn't always announce itself is uncomfortable when you've built your confidence around visible dominance. One of the witnesses finally spoke. That was controlled. The SEAL glanced at them, then back at Seagal. Yeah, he said. That's the word. He paused, then added, You could have taken it further. Seagal nodded. But then it becomes about me. The SEAL considered that. And you didn't want that. No, Seagal replied. I wanted it to end. Another pause. This one felt lighter. In many confrontations, the aftermath matters more than the clash itself. How people behave once power has shifted reveals their character. Those who seek validation tend to linger in victory. Those who seek resolution step away. The SEAL exhaled slowly, then let out a quiet chuckle. You know, he said, most guys would have told that story for the rest of their lives. Seagal's expression didn't change. Stories tend to grow, he said. Truth doesn't need help. That line stuck. The witnesses exchanged looks. Someone nodded subtly, as if a lesson had just landed. The SEAL straightened up. I came in with assumptions, he admitted. That's on me. Seagal met his eyes. Assumptions are human, he said. What we do after them is choice. That was the closest thing to a moral statement anyone would make that day. This is where respect becomes mutual rather than hierarchical. The SEAL didn't submit, and Seagal didn't dominate. Instead, both adjusted their internal narratives, a rare outcome in confrontations fueled by pride. The SEAL looked around the room again. No cameras, he said. Good. One of the witnesses nodded. Another put their phone back into their pocket, realizing they'd never actually taken it out. This stays here, the SEAL added. Seagal agreed. It should. For a moment, it almost felt ceremonial, an unspoken agreement sealed by restraint rather than force. Let me ask you something real, not about fighting, but about life. When someone changes your perspective without humiliating you, does that earn more respect than someone who wins loudly? Comment quiet respect or loud victory, and tell me why. The SEAL nodded again, this time with a faint smile. You know, he said, I thought confidence meant being unshakable. Seagal replied, it means being willing to adjust. That answer lingered. The witnesses began to move naturally now, stretching, shifting, returning to normal behavior. The tension that had filled the space earlier had dissolved into something almost calm. But no one forgot what they'd seen. Some moments don't change the world, they change people. These moments rarely go viral, rarely get documented, but they often have the deepest impact. They quietly rewrite how someone understands strength, ego, and restraint. The SEAL extended his hand. Seagal shook it, firm, brief, unceremonious. No applause followed. None was needed. As the SEAL turned to leave, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said, that wasn't a movie move. Seagal gave a slight nod. No, he said. It wasn't. The door closed softly behind him. The room returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could after something like that. The 8 witnesses slowly dispersed, each carrying the same unspoken thought. They had just seen something real. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Not loud. Real. And in a world obsessed with spectacle, that quiet authenticity left the strongest impression of all. Nothing about what happened that day was meant to travel beyond that room. There were no cameras. No social media clips. No headlines the next morning. In fact, if any of the 8 witnesses had been asked later to prove it happened, they wouldn't have been able to. Not with footage, not with photos, not with evidence that the internet usually demands. And yet, every one of them carried the moment with them. Because some experiences don't need proof. They change you quietly. After the Navy SEAL left, the room slowly returned to motion. People stretched, picked up bags, checked the time. Ordinary movements. Ordinary sounds. But the atmosphere had shifted. There was a subtle awareness now, like everyone had just been reminded of something important they'd forgotten. Steven Seagal didn't linger. He gathered his things calmly, spoke briefly with a couple of people, and prepared to leave. No victory lap. No explanation tour. No attempt to control the narrative. One of the witnesses finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air. Do you ever get tired of people testing you? Seagal paused for a moment, then answered honestly. People test what they don't understand, he said. It's not personal. This is a hard truth for many people to accept. Challenges often say more about the challenger than the challenged. When someone feels unsure about their own identity or status, they look for external benchmarks, someone to measure themselves against. Another witness asked, "Why didn't you shut it down earlier?" Seagal smiled faintly. Because lessons stick better when people arrive at them themselves. That answer stayed with them. Later, in private conversations, the witnesses talked about what they had seen, not as gossip, but as reflection. Some admitted they had doubted Seagal before that day. Others admitted they had expected arrogance, or theatrics, or something performative. None of that came. Instead, they saw restraint. True confidence doesn't seek confirmation. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't rush to correct misconceptions. It waits, and lets reality speak when necessary. As for the Navy SEAL, his reaction carried its own weight. There was no bitterness. No excuses. No attempts to reframe the encounter as just a drill or not serious. He didn't need to protect his ego by rewriting the moment. He simply adjusted his perspective. That's rare. And it's worth more than winning any argument. Growth often comes not from being proven wrong, but from being proven something new. The SEAL didn't lose status, he gained insight. That's the kind of exchange that builds respect rather than resentment. In the weeks that followed, the story surfaced quietly in small circles. Not as a boast, not as a myth, but as a reminder. A reminder that appearances mislead. That noise isn't power. That restraint can be more intimidating than aggression. And that sometimes, the most decisive moments in life happen when no one is watching. Let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. Have you ever underestimated someone because they didn't look the part, only to later realize they were far more capable than you imagined? If yes, what did that moment teach you? Because that's the real takeaway here. Not who would win a fight. Not whose background is more real. Not whose experience matters more. But this. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself, only when necessary. And when it does, it doesn't humiliate. It clarifies. If you believe true power is calm, controlled, and respectful, type respect in the comments. And if stories like this make you think a little deeper about confidence, ego, and humility, subscribe for more real-life moments that remind us what strength actually looks like. Because the loudest people are rarely the strongest. And the strongest ones, you usually don't notice them until it's already clear.